everyone, and welcome back to Alpine Intel's The Savvy Adjuster podcast, where we discuss some of the insurance related topics important to adjusters with the experts who know them best. I'm your host, Alpine Intel Sales Operations Manager Chris Nichols. Now, whether you handle property, auto, liability, or even workers' comp insurance claims, Alpine Intel is dedicated to helping you reach peak performance throughout the policy lifecycle. We do that through our operating brands, and we are respected as an industry leader for our scale and our track record of conducting expert, specialized, and accurate investigations. And each of our individual service lines has a similar reputation. So today's topic is about residential electrical equipment. Last year, our StrikeCheck team evaluated nearly 400 different types of electronics and electrically powered specialty items that represented over, get this, 5,000 brands. And here today to help us better understand what caused all that equipment to fail, I'm joined by Alpine Intel Executive Vice President of Specialty Assessments, Paul Whitmore, and Alpine Intel Strategic Sales Development Manager, Chris Tomlinson. Both have extensive knowledge in the broad scope of items that your policyholders include in claims, from the most common ones like TVs and refrigerators to those you may not see as often but are still included in claims. Gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
So before we jump in, listener, don't forget each claim is unique. And on this podcast, we do speak in general terms. That's why it's so important to get an expert assessment to make sure you have all the facts you need to make a settlement decision that accounts for the evidence related to each claim. Now, before we get into our topic today, we always love to start every conversation with our guests telling us a little bit about themselves. We have so many experts here at Alpine Intel who come from a variety of different backgrounds, and we'd love to hear about yours. So, Paul, let's start with you. If you wouldn't mind, can you share a little bit about your background?
Sure. Paul Whitmore. I work with our Specialty Assessments Division, which includes HVACI, StrikeCheck, Tech Loss, HMI, all wonderful brands. And before coming on with Alpine, I've been in the claims business for about 20 years. Started on the carrier side as an adjuster, also worked on the independent side as an adjuster, and actually before that, I actually majored in insurance as well. So long time in the insurance business.
Well, very nice. And Chris, how about yourself? Tell me a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks so much. Chris Tomlinson here. I did not major in insurance like Paul, but I have had an extensive insurance background. I actually started in property and casualty insurance sales upon leaving school. So I've started that route. So I have an understanding of like policies and that side of things, and moved over to Alpine, which was at that time HVACI and StrikeCheck in 2018. And then started on the recruiting side where I was helping recruit the technicians and specialists that we send out for our investigations, and then moved over directly to the account management side, working specifically on the StrikeCheck business right away, and then moved over to kind of the more Alpine totality of what we all look at now.
Perfect. Well, needless to say, regardless of majors, we are in good hands with the both of you today. A vast knowledge base in front of us here today, so I'm excited about this topic. So let's dive in. And Chris, I'll ask the first question to you. So I am located in Wisconsin, and we are all desperately trying to cling to the last of the nice outdoor weather before the snow comes, which we know it will. And we're trying to spend as much time outdoors. So speaking of the outdoors, while many policyholders file claims for indoor electronics a lot of the time, I'd love to hear about some of the outdoor electrical equipment that may be included in claims, and really what types of causes of loss might be associated with those.
Yeah, that's a great question. We look at kind of a wide array of different equipment types, anything from things inside, like you're talking about, like your TVs and refrigerators and tablets and things of that nature, to a lot of outdoor equipment. I think one of the big ones that we always see, and this one's always interesting to me, is irrigation controllers. That's one that we see quite frequently. We see a lot of like landscape lighting, boat lift systems, even outdoor security cameras, outdoor electrical panels, a wide array of different things from that perspective. And then on the cause of losses, we see those for many different causes of losses. We see those for lightning or surge damages, of course, which is a lot of what we see at StrikeCheck. But we also see like wind damage claims where the tree might have fallen on the power line and pulled the electrical panel away from the property. We see hail claims to things like solar panels, which is something else that we look at. We see wear and tear related damages. So pretty much any and everything damage related we can see on that external equipment, similar to what we see on the internal equipment as well.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the podcast, just saying, saying the number of items that we look at, the number of brands, you forget about some stuff outside, right? You think it's all internal TVs, home theater equipment, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff outside that StrikeCheck can certainly look at. Paul, I would love to get your thoughts on that as well. As far as other outdoor equipment, I know Chris did a good job of mentioning some. Can you think of any others that StrikeCheck kind of specializes in that they can assist adjusters in looking at?
Sure. And on top of the pool equipment, you really, like you alluded to with the time of season, it's football season. And so, you drive down the street, you see a lot of these outdoor, living areas with the TVs, the speaker systems, the lighting. And so there's a lot outside that, like you said, we used to think was just inside, but it's, you walk in your garage, you got things plugged in, you got electric scooters, you got power tools, you go inside, and I've got kids, so there's tablets hooked up, there's Bluetooth speakers, and you're used to seeing that all inside, plugged into the kitchen, but then you go outside and you realize there's just as much outside plugged in as there is inside. I think my kids probably plug in their stuff outside more than they do inside, these days. So there's always exposure outside the house that we're not really thinking of on a constant basis. And it's important to have those looked at. You get a claim filed, and it's because they notice some things aren't working inside, but at the same time, have they gone out and tested the things outside to make sure are those working, or do they need to be looked at as well? Because for the most part, if you got stuff inside that's not working, from if it's lightning, if it's power surge, if it's freezing, you're going to see the same thing outside as well.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Lots of stuff StrikeCheck can help our adjusters out with. So, Paul, we'll stick with you since we are talking about outdoor electrical equipment. StrikeCheck is often associated with lightning or high voltage surge claims, but we all know it's much more than that. So we touched on a few, but I would love to really kind of dive deeper and really drive home the fact of other perils that StrikeCheck looks at often as it relates to property that maybe adjusters don't know about.
Yeah, it's a great time for that conversation because coming off summer, a lot of lightning, a lot of surge, which is what we'll see, during the summertime. But then you go into winter and you start picking up these winter storms. You got pipe breaks, you got plumbing failures. Even from the outside, you have water that can be coming in through the roof. You have ice damming up in the Northeast and in the Midwest during the wintertime, and then also you're going to deal with probably some surface water issues as well. So there's it can come in from the outside, and on the inside, with freezing, you're going to have some plumbing breaks, even appliance failures, right? That can all lead to water damage. Especially if you're in a two-story house and you got a pipe that breaks upstairs, and then everything on the first floor can be exposed to that water coming down. And it's coming from the roof, top down. All of these electronics, your appliances, everything can be exposed to potential water damage there. It's important again to look at it. Chris had alluded to, even during the winter, you're going to have ice and snow build up on trees, and trees are going to come down and pull power lines down. You're going to see surge that way. But it's important to look at everything, because what we find as we're looking at these electronics and these appliances, that while some might be damaged, it doesn't mean everything is damaged. We often find that there's some working condition. So it's important to actually, take a look at every item and do the proper testing to make sure you've got the proper scope of damage.
Sure. I think you make a good point too. We focus sometimes on what the cause of loss was, as we should, right? But sometimes we get out and look at items and it's just simple wear and tear, right? Or to your point, it's non-damaged, but you still need to look at those things to determine that they are in working condition. So, Chris, I know you deal with a lot of StrikeCheck claims assessments throughout your day-to-day. Paul touched on a lot of the perils. Any of them that may have slipped by that you can think of that StrikeCheck often sees when it is relating to on-site inspections?
Yeah, there are definitely a few additional ones. I mean, Paul hit on a lot of them. Water is probably the number one that we're seeing right now. Obviously, just coming out of the summer season, coming into the fall season, we usually see, historically, have seen some big storms start to come through. And when that happens, there's always damages associated with things like water, and high voltage surge, and different things of that nature, even wind damages, things of that context. But there's also theft vandalism type claims that we get involved in, where there may be some theft of some solar equipment on a property location, or vandalism to an insured's electrical system or something of that nature. We also get involved in fire related claims too. We handled a lot of claims out in the California area due to the wildfires that came through, assessing the electronics and appliances, also assessing the electrical system at the property for was it damaged via the smoke fire event? What is the repairability of it? Things of that nature. So pretty much, as we were talking about earlier, any and everything related to the perils we can inspect. We even get involved in situations where potential mechanical breakdown of an appliance or something like that to determine what that is. So kind of a wide array of things, and it really focuses on the totality of what StrikeCheck does, right? And as Paul alluded to, as of last year, 2024, 29% of the electrical items that we looked at were actually non-damaged, which again kind of highlights just the vast nature of what we do at StrikeCheck. So that's kind of my commentary on that. But I mean, pretty much any and everything peril related, StrikeCheck can handle.
Sure. Yeah. And you touched on something I'd like maybe a quick follow-up question on repairability, right? We talk about non-damage, but repairability is big. And for someone who's never seen a StrikeCheck report, can you speak a little bit about that repair versus replace that is included in those reports?
Yeah, absolutely. We will always, on every single investigation, go line item by line item on every piece of equipment that we looked at and have what we call our repair versus replacement recommendation, and kind of break down what the repair versus replacement recommendation is and the cost associated with that, right? So repairability is really big, especially on those specialty equipment types, things like electrical panels, outlets, and wiring, things like pools, generators, solar panels, things with those higher dollar values. You're not going to really repair a TV typically when it's damaged, right? But you're going to be able to repair appliances and things of that nature. So the repairability along with the non-damage is really valuable to your point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thanks for diving a little bit deeper into that. And Chris, we'll stick with you on this next question. So we talked earlier about pools, hot tubs, things like that. Depending on where someone lives, and I alluded, I live in Wisconsin, where it does get a little chillier than other places. Some policyholders may be getting those types of items ready to brace for cooler temperatures, right? So, why might carriers still see some of this equipment claimed after the summer months, and what considerations should they know about resolving those claims?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you alluded to, freezing conditions and that aspect are something that do happen very frequently to pools and hot tubs. When with hot tubs specifically with freezing, if you don't have the insulation on the piping correct, or if you did not winterize the equipment, there's opportunity for freezing that does happen with that type of equipment. Similarly for pools, right? Your pool pumps, your pool heaters, your pool filters, they all have the ability to have water sitting there sedentary, not moving around, and that equipment can freeze, right? Which can cause damages and things that need to be evaluated. So it's definitely something that we see, but even in the winter months, there's also other perils that do affect pools still. There's still high voltage surges. They still happen in the winter months, right? It's not just the freezing at that time. There are those types of damages. There are trees that fall on equipment and damage equipment. So even in those months, there are other perils that do affect pool and hot tub equipment, along with even wear and tear related losses. Actually, with hot tubs specifically, that's the second most common cause of loss for hot tubs, if you think about that.
Interesting. So, yeah, no, I hadn't thought about that, but I appreciate you bringing up the fact that it's not all surge related. It's not all lightning, with these electronics. To your point, a tree could have fallen on that, right? And it's always good to get somebody out there to look to see repairability of that versus a full replacement. So, yeah. And don't forget, listener, alpineintel.com, our website has a resource library. We've got a great article about how even hot tubs don't like cold weather. So check that out. May help you with some future claims. Well, Paul, I'd like to head back to you for the next question. So we know from previous podcasts, and you even touched on this about water intrusion coming from a second story into a first story and how water can make its way into unwanted places. And for our listeners that haven't listened to those previous podcasts, definitely check them out, specifically the episodes on plumbing related losses and water damage to structural elements. But Paul, can you speak a little bit to how water can impact residential policyholders, electrical equipment and electronics?
Sure. What Chris was talking about with pools and hot tubs, and you're looking at the wintertime, what we've seen is a pattern where it's getting colder in the southern part of the country, right? And those homes really aren't built to withstand real freezing temperatures. And you'll see, days, weeks where the temperatures will drop below freezing, and that absolutely does cause pipes to burst, freezing, ice and snow on trees to come down. It was maybe 5, 6 years ago in Texas when I was an adjuster. There was the big freeze that came through Texas, and you saw specifically in churches where it would happen on a Tuesday and there's nobody in the church, and people come to the church on a Friday, Saturday, and there's 2 feet of standing water in the church because of broken pipes, right? And everybody realized that the pipes aren't insulated; they're not ready to take on that kind of those low temperatures. So if the homeowners aren't prepared, have the right insulation, or turn the water off, if maybe it's a rental house, it's not something that somebody lives in full time, absolutely you will see water damage come in through plumbing failures and frozen pipes. And then also up in the Northeast, you will see the ice damming, where the snow and the ice builds up on the roof and then it melts, and it refreezes, and you have this water trapped under there, and it's going to make its way in through the roof. Water finds an opening. It always does. And then when that comes in, sometimes it takes, days or weeks before you actually notice that you have this water coming in. And by that point, it might be affecting your wiring that's in your house, right? So it could be affecting your outlets, which then is affecting your electronics and your appliances. And it's also important to understand, like on the wiring and the electrical side, that if you have damaged electronics, it might be that you also need to take a look at the wiring and make sure that all your outlets are working, and that you don't have a bigger issue than you think of maybe just a refrigerator that isn't working, or an ice maker that's not working. You might have a more serious issue on your hands there that you make sure you want to get that looked at as well, which StrikeCheck does handle, looking at their electrical panels, the outlets, the wiring.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I think a lot of our clients don't realize that. They think of just contents when they think of StrikeCheck. But yeah, I say the guts of the dwelling, right? The panel, the outlet, the wirings, both on residential and commercial. StrikeCheck is well equipped to look at that stuff as well. But it sounds like water, and I'm going to use a water-related pun, can have a ripple effect on a claim where it'll affect one thing that'll then lead down the line to affect other things. So, Chris, I would love to get your thoughts on this question as well, because again, I know you deal a lot with StrikeCheck assessments, see a lot of them throughout your day. Can you speak a little bit about what you've seen as far as how water can impact electrical items?
Yeah, I definitely can add some additional commentary to what Paul mentioned. He did a good job about breaking down a lot of it, but I think there's also a couple other things that we see. We see flooding that does end up impacting property locations, which does cause damage to a lot of electrical items once it gets into the property. Water backup's another one that we see, where the water backs up through the sewers and drains, and a lot of times into basements or crawl spaces, and damages things like washers and dryers that are in the basement, hot water heaters that are down there. Just kind of the water sitting there, as Paul was alluding to, and the longer it sits there, the longer it can affect those items, right? So to kind of piggyback on what he said, I think electrical is probably one of the other big things that we see: panels, outlets, and wiring, things that folks might not necessarily think of StrikeCheck for, but that's something that we do all the time, is looking at that type of equipment.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on the water analogy, it's kind of like the iceberg, right? The damaged appliance or electronics sometimes can just be the tip of the iceberg, right? And you
Yeah.
really need to do a full investigation to make sure there's nothing else under there that you can't see behind the walls.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if nothing else, people have got their money's worth out of water-based puns here today on the episode. So I appreciate the secondary one. But yeah, it really is amazing. And prior to the episode, I was diving into the very long list of items that StrikeCheck looks at, and really, I think it's a good note to people listening. Include everything, right? We look at air fryers, arcade games, waffle makers, right? And so fitness equipment we talked about a little bit about. So really, anything that plugs into electricity, StrikeCheck is well equipped to handle. So we usually like to end our podcast with our guests sharing experiences that they've had. Or they've seen in claims, stories from the field. So, Chris, again, I do know that you have a heavy hand on the StrikeCheck assessments, see a lot of those, and so I wanted to get your, I guess your story about through your day to day, you deal with a lot of the StrikeCheck assignments. Are there any that kind of stand out that you can share? Some interesting things included, and what the assessment determined. I'm sure you've got a couple to share.
Yeah, I've got a few that I think would fit well with this. So this was one from a few years ago where we went out and did an investigation for a well pump system to determine what the cause of loss of the well pump system was. It was a potential theft, vandalism, loss. We get out there, perform an investigation, and realize that the entire well is gone. So on the back end, we end up finding out that that a person came and actually lifted the entire well and well casing out with a crane prior to us actually arriving to the location. So that was just one that was pretty interesting after we actually went out and investigated that one. So that was one that I thought would be good to share. And then we had one more recently this year, actually, where there was a commercial property location that was a strip mall that we were engaged to go look at with StrikeCheck and HVACI, actually, where there was an altercation at the property location that involved an arson as well as a shooting outside the property location, and involved four different properties within a building. And StrikeCheck was engaged to go out and look at the electrical infrastructure of the property. And there were a couple of establishments in there that were involved with this. So we went out and evaluated the electrical to determine what the extent of the electrical damage was, as well as what it would take to get it back to pre-loss condition. So that one was just really interesting. Anytime there's some sort of altercation at a property location, those always end up coming to the front of the mind, right, when you think about those. But it's definitely one of those that aren't too frequent that we see those. But yeah, theft, vandalism, and arson and smoke fire, that's something that always kind of rings a bell when you think of interesting stories.
Sure. The sheer logistics are mind-boggling to steal an entire well. I get the well pump. I get it. But stealing an entire well takes some gumption. So very interesting. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Thanks for joining me here on the podcast again, gentlemen, Paul, Chris, and for taking us through some of those common electrical equipment included in residential claims. We really, truly appreciate you joining us here today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
And if any of our listeners want to learn more, make sure to check the show notes for resources on this topic. You can also find out more, and I mentioned it earlier, in our Alpine Intel resources library. And you can always learn more about our suite of services at our website. I mentioned it before, but it is alpineintel.com. Make sure to bookmark that. And make sure to subscribe to the Savvy Adjuster podcast so you never miss an episode. We appreciate you joining us here today. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.